What's one of the most distracting things for a guest at a church? We're going to answer that question today on the Church Revitalization Podcast.
Hello, and welcome to the Church Revitalization Podcast, brought to you by the Malphurs Group team, where each week we tackle important, actionable topics to help churches thrive. And now, here's your hosts, Scott Ball and AJ Matthew.
Welcome to the Church Revitalization Podcast. My name is Scott Ball. I'm joined by my friend and co-host, AJ Matthew. AJ, what is one of the most distracting things for a guest at a church? We are guests at lots of churches. Regularly, we are guests as we serve with churches. What is one of the most distracting things for a guest in a church?
Well, there are a variety, but for the purposes of this episode today, we're talking about the music during the worship service. Oh my goodness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's true. It is one of the most distracting things. Bad worship music. It's one of those really, really distracting things for a guest. I think it's worth noting, though, it's not so much about style. It's not. It's not like again, we visit a lot of churches. The variety of style, ranges from really traditional to really modern. And the what distinguishes good from bad is not really the style. Yeah. I mean, I may have a preference, or you may have a preference for what we like, but that's not usually the thing that's distracting. It's not the style that's distracting.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Which, even there's churches that don't even know what their style is. So, so that's part of it as well. I think that's the only time style becomes distracting, is we're not even sure what the style is that you're witnessing. What exactly is happening in front of me?
Yeah. Yeah. I had a church that I worked with several years ago that the style that they were playing depended on what week you were there at the church.
Oh yeah.
So like the first week of the month was like this, the second week of the month was like this, the third week, the fourth week. And then if there was a fifth Sunday, all bets were off on what the deal was going to be, right?
Student Sunday.
Actually, I think it was that. I think it was students on Sunday. But the thing is, they had no identity. And so people would actually invite people to church based on what week of the month it was. It was like, oh, I don't want them to come to the week 2 thing, or I didn't want them to come to week 4. And we had kind of an honest conversation about this. I'm like, do you not see how this is a problem? And they said, well, we're trying to make as many people happy as we possibly can. And the reality is they just weren't making anybody all that happy. So thankfully they came up with a different plan, and it's working much better for them. But yeah, it has nothing to do with the style, or at least that's not the primary driver. It has to do with the quality. The quality of the music has got to be there, I think, in order for it to not be distracting. I want to, you were shocked when I told you this in our prep, AJ, but music is not statistically, based on all the research that I've backed this up, did my homework. It is not the primary factor in determining whether a guest comes back. It's not a primary factor. At best, it's like number 5 on the list. So there are a lot of other reasons why a person will come back. How friendly the church seems, how personable the pastor seems to be, the quality of children's ministry, how relatable and practical the sermon was. So all of these things play a much higher role than the music. But if you're on the fence on any of those other issues, music may be the thing that tips you over the edge on whether you come back or whether you don't. And so it's important.
I haven't looked at the research that you looked at. I would possibly contend that out of those 5 things you just mentioned, it was like 5th or 6th on the list, but they're all probably really close together. It's not like there's a huge gap, like all these things are really important, but music was 5th, and it was a distant 5th. I'm suggesting it might've been a pretty close 5th.
Okay. All right. I'll maybe just speak for myself and my own experience in working with churches and making choices on attending church. I think that, I guess maybe what I would contend is, if the music is at least a B, it's okay. Like it doesn't have to be an A.
Yeah. Yeah.
But if it's an F, like if it's really bad,
Mhm.
then all the other things wouldn't be enough to get over the fact that the music is
Yeah.
just
Mhm.
that bad. Is that fair to say, maybe?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Yeah. And it's so subjective as well. There's, it's like a big deal to some people, like yours truly. And for other people, it's just not so much. They just don't care.
There are some things that are not subjective. Like we've all watched American Idol auditions, where you're like, you don't have to be a musician to hear some people sing and go, that person can't sing. And
true.
unfortunately, I think a lot of our churches have people up on stage who probably shouldn't have a microphone in their hands.
Or maybe you need to put them in front of Simon Cowell. They could get a little honesty.
Yeah. Okay. So the premise of this episode today is that some of us have situations where our music is not good.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe we could say it's actually bad. At minimum, it's not as good as we'd like for it to be. So we want to be really hyper practical. Actually, AJ, you were really pushing me in our sort of our pre-recording planning session for this episode. Walk me from like step one. How do I get out of this situation? Mm-hmm. And so that's what we want to do today in the episode.
Yeah. Yep. So let's dive in. So the first thing that needs to happen, and it might be the hardest one on the list, and that is to get some honest feedback on the current state of the worship music at your church, and to not automatically just reject it. Really, you need to come to the realization that what you're doing isn't good. And so that might not be one person. I mean, you need to get like a variety probably of people, like get a few opinions on that. Don't just trust one opinion. Because depending on the relationship they have to you, they may not be honest with you either. And depending on how close you, the person inviting them, are to the actual music happening. If you're the one up there singing and you're like, hey, come tell me if I'm singing well, best friend, that's probably not the best scenario for honest feedback. So somebody, a disinterested third party from whoever, somebody that's not on stage, your friendly Malfers group church guide, if we happen to be near you or in your town, or working with your church, then we'll tell you.
One of the beauties of maybe we would call it few fringe benefits maybe of the pandemic is most people have their worship services online. Mm-hmm. So it's easier than ever to give feedback on that. Now I will, to be fair, I think how it sounds online is always worse than it sounds in person. So, but if it's really, really bad online, it's probably not great in person either. Mm-hmm. So you can certainly get feedback more easily now. I have an acquaintance of mine who is on staff at a church. He's an executive pastor. And one of the things that they've done regularly, I think this is interesting, is they've hired someone on one of those like TaskRabbit type things, like where you can hire people online through an app to do tasks like for you,
kind of thing.
Kind of, but it's more local than that. Like find someone local to do a task for you. I think the app is maybe called TaskRabbit or something like that. And they just offer like, hey, come to our church. They pay them $100 and give them a form. Fill this out. So they're getting like a random person from their community. They're paying them $100 to like come to their church and give feedback. And that's the task they've given. So that'd be a way to do it. There's lots of ways you could do this. And it's easier now than ever to get feedback on your worship service because it very likely is online. So you can get some feedback on how the music sounds.
Yeah. I just checked out a church, that I met with not too long ago. And I was just looking at what's going on online and checked out a worship service. And the first song they did, the lady singing it just had a beautiful voice. I mean, worship service was looking really good. And then the next song was there was two ladies singing. To the next song, the other lady was singing, and it was way not as good. And I was like, oh no, this like really bad pitch problems. And yeah, so the quality of the recording wasn't the issue, because I got a really good example of a vocalist, and then I got a very not good example of a vocalist. But this is the kind of situation that, churches are in. You maybe have a few people, and one is pretty good, and somebody else might not be that good. So
yeah, this was going to be point 3, but let's maybe then, that's a really good segue to what would be point 3. Let's do it as point 2.
Yeah. Okay.
In the show notes now, it'll be point 2, but just for the purposes of our discussion here, AJ, let's move it up to point 2 from 3.
Okay. Yeah. So our next point then is you have to be willing to say no to vocalists and musicians who just really they're not ready for the main stage. Let's just not sugarcoat it. Some people are just not good. And hopefully, I don't know, it could be, maybe no one has ever told them that. They might think they're good. They sound good in the shower and in the car when the volume is cranked up to themselves. But, when they have a microphone and there's more of a, as you said earlier, Scott, before we went on the air, a spotlight on their voice, it's not coming off well. So, as a worship pastor, worship minister, whatever title might be for the person in charge of the music and the ministry of worship, you have to be willing to say no to people that are just not presenting the quality sound that the church deserves, that everybody would want. And so I don't know if this is more oversight in these scenarios, or if it is not wanting to hurt people's feelings, or just this general attitude that it just doesn't have to be that good. Like, oh, bless their heart, they're willing, they sure try hard, they're willing to get up there, and well, I don't know if anybody else, I don't know what the most common scenario is that allows this to happen. You have any feel for that, Scott?
Yeah. So, I mean, maybe this is a good place to kind of interject this. I feel like I can speak on this with some degree of authority, not just because AJ and I have worked with dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of churches over the years, but because I led a worship ministry for about 5 years in various roles, starting out directly overseeing it and leading on a regular basis, and then more of an oversight role later. But regardless, I've been in this situation, and I know what it's like to have to make hard calls on different people, and whether or not you really want to put a microphone in their hands and or an instrument in their hands. And I think that the main thing that I used to hear when I would tell people no is, they just want to serve the Lord, and it's kind of dishonoring their intention by not letting them do it. And, you might be stifling their growth as a believer by telling them no. And I reject those things on a couple of bases, a couple of reasons. One, if it's not their gifting, I'm doing them a disservice by putting them in a position where they're going to be serving outside of their gifting. I'd rather help them find a spot where they're better equipped. They're going to enjoy it more. But two, I mean, we don't apply this logic to anything else. Just because someone says, well, I'd like to be in the pulpit. Okay. Well, are you any good at teaching? Any good at preaching? Well, no. You don't go, well, their heart's in the right place, let's put them in the pulpit. We don't do that. So similarly, we ought not have that attitude with worship ministry. So how can you handle those situations? Here's a couple of tips. One, if your church, this is actually making a resurgence, AJ, choirs. Choirs are making a resurgence even in more contemporary settings. So they'll put some people up there in a group to add volume. So maybe you go, hey, yeah, we'd love to have you in this chorus section. Because a bad voice blended in with a bunch of other voices, it kind of hides it, and it's fine. If they really love music, they want to sing, you could put them up there that way. In my situation in leading, we didn't have something like that. So what I would do is say, hey, you know what? I don't think you're ready yet for being up there on a Sunday, but I'd love to help you develop and grow your talent. And so I would love to invite you. We have practice every Thursday night from 7 to 9, and you're invited to be a part of that. Any Thursday you want to come, I'll help you. You know what? We'll mentor you. We'll have you fully participate in practice. And, you know, as you improve, we can get you on the schedule. 9 times out of 10, AJ, people just say no thanks, you know, because they don't care that much about it.
Yeah.
If they did, they'd be there. And I did have a couple instances where I had some folks who weren't great. This was more instruments, people playing bass or guitar or something. And I have them come, and then they'd practice and they would get better, and I would put them on. So you don't have to just say no. You can give an opportunity for growth. And if they're willing to put in the work, then you can put them up on a Sunday. If they're not willing to if they don't care enough to put in the work, then why should you sacrifice the quality to make them feel better? I don't think that's very good. Yeah.
I mean, you can't really look at every member of a worship team equally as well. As you just said, there's difference in a vocalist. There's difference in a background vocalist or a chorus vocalist versus a lead vocalist. You know, I mean, you can not to downplay my bass player buddies out there. My best friend's a bass player. A mediocre bass player isn't going to stick out like a pitchy vocalist. And you could train up that bass player. A bad drummer, though, I mean, it's a central sound. Or a lead guitar player who, can't hit the right notes, or just has a really bad feel for the song, could be really bad. So, there's some instruments that you can kind of downplay and blend in, and others you can't, including the instrument of the human voice. And so you can't just take a blanket approach to this kind of stuff either. It really has to be in a very individual, player and part, kind of view.
Yeah. If you got someone who wants to play drums and they're no good, put them on the bongos in the back, like so they can work on their rhythm. You got the lead drummer. They're just back
conga
there
with a pillow stuffed in it. There you go.
Yeah.
Like, just put them on something. Yeah, that's all right. So as you're playing. Yeah.
Just get a cajon or something over there and just let them kind of get along to it. Don't mic it. Be all right.
But and so now for all the people that are like, see, you're only talking about contemporary worship. No, I mean, we might have a string sections. Again, if we've got 3 cello players, maybe only one of them is the quality that would have a solo or something, or piano, depending on what the song is, how that might come out. So, lots of things. If you have people, if you have special music in your worship service, that might be some kind of a soloist on a really unique instrument. They should be good at that. They should be really good at that, because then you're just telling people, hey, focus all your attention here. So I
don't want to get stuck on this too long, AJ, but you're bringing up something that's related to that, which is I used to work with my vocalists not just on the quality of their voice, which is one thing. I kind of assume that if I had them up there, they were good at that. But to lead a song isn't just about how well you can sing the notes. Like, you have to have presence. Like, you have to command people's attention, and that's something I used to work on a lot, especially with my female vocalists. I always used to say, and I apologize if anyone's listening to this and is offended by it, but it's just been my experience. Men tend to have an easier time because their physical presence is larger and their vocals tend to be lower. It's easier for them to command attention, especially if they're playing an instrument. If they're leading on guitar or something and singing, it's much easier for them to command the attention of the room. Women often tend to come in on themselves and hold the microphone like this. And so I used to work on like open yourself up, have hands out versus arms in, and look at people. And, all of these things have to do with leading. If you're going to have someone lead a song, be sure that they're prepared for the leadership of that song and not just the singing of it. So,
yeah. Yeah, we talked about this before we went on the air, but if anybody participating in the delivery of a song, no matter what part they play, if mentally they're not at the level in which the execution of the song is second nature, and where they can really have the presence of I hate to use the word performing, but to perform the song in a way that the song is obviously meaningful, then that's an issue. So the musicianship aspect of them performing a piece of music has got to be second nature. You can't be thinking we're going to the G here, B flat. That's got to be done. That's got to be fixed in rehearsal ahead of time, so that when you're there to perform this song, you're able to put actual emotion and presence into it, so that people begin to feel what you feel in performing the song. That's the idea of great worship leading.
Yeah. Okay, so let's we're honest about our current state of the ministry, music ministry. We have maybe had some hard conversations with people who we either need to move them into a different role, or maybe we're asking them to shuffle off the music ministry because they're hurting the quality of the music. Now maybe we're stripped down, AJ, to not enough musicians participating. How do we handle this?
Yeah. So this is where the rubber meets the road. This is the actual practicality that a lot of people listening are going to be like, okay, smarty pants, tell us how in the world we're going to actually get decent people. And it starts here. And this is the possibility of recruiting outside musicians to serve on your team. And so, listen, I use the word recruit outside musicians, not necessarily, and hopefully not pay musicians to begin serving on the team, but take an active leadership approach to networking and hopefully being able to cultivate somebody, multiple people that can come in for a short period of time, not an extended or indefinite period of time, to help fill the gap between today and when perhaps you now have, a music ministry in which you've got multiple teams even that are going to be able to rotate out. So this is the point here is take an active leadership responsibility in recruiting musicians.
Yeah. Okay. So this is touchy. This is difficult. But again, I have sat in this boat. So I was a part of starting a worship ministry in a brand new church, in a church plant. And so trust me, I've sat in that seat where I'm like, I don't have a bass player. And again, I'm speaking from my own experience. So it was more of a modern worship situation. Didn't have a drummer, didn't have a bass player, didn't have anyone play electric guitar. I sing and play the acoustic guitar that you see behind me. And even at that, I'm okay. I'm not amazing. No one would go, wow, you're really great at acoustic guitar. I'm good enough. My vocals are good enough. What I knew I could do, though, is lead. And so I was like, I'm going to focus on leading and recruiting a good team. So where do I start? Well, there's a couple of routes you can go. One, other churches. Now I know immediately some of you are going, wait a minute, that's sheep stealing. I mean, think of it like sheep sharing. If you can find a larger church that's got a really good music ministry, they maybe have a third string bass player or a third string vocalist who would like more opportunities to lead and play more often. So because the ministry may be so big that they're only getting scheduled, once every 6 weeks, and they love the worship ministry. So they'd like the opportunity to participate twice a month. So and you should always be upfront with that church. So that's what's not stealing, it's sharing. If you say, hey, we're trying to reinvigorate our worship ministry, do you have any musicians that you would be willing to, further down your talent pool, who might be willing to help and serve at our church for a season? In church planting, we ask for a year. We say, hey, will you invest a year in this ministry? And very often people will say yes to that. Other places to look would be colleges, Christian colleges. They maybe have people, you got all kinds of kids sitting in dorms playing guitar. who would like an opportunity to play. They got vocalists and things as well. So there are ways to find little reservoirs of talent, I guess, and try to tap into those. But that takes recruitment. You have to sit down with people, have a vision for what your ministry is going to be, and invite them to participate in helping you build that thing. So be upfront and go, we don't have a great worship ministry right now, but we have a vision for doing this. We have a vision that the ministry would look like this, and we're looking for people who can help us build that. There's a certain group of people who will be attracted to that entrepreneurial aspect of helping to build a new worship ministry. And if you can find those people, they'll get connected. Listen, you don't need 70 people to be involved in your worship ministry. If you can find a handful of people who are willing to commit for a year or so, it will really make a difference. So let me just encourage you in that. AJ mentioned paying musicians. Listen, I hate it with every fiber of my being, because I feel like ministry at the end of the day is supposed to be about leadership and leadership development. And it feels like a shortcut, like a cheat code to hire outside musicians. But if that's your only option, then you should investigate that option as well. But to me, that's the option of last resort. Check every other box first. Can we recruit a team? Can we develop leaders? Can we find a talent pool? Can we cooperate with other churches that maybe are bigger or further along than us, that have a deeper talent pool, who would be willing to share some of those people with us for a season? Look at every other option first before you go to that one.
What's your thoughts? This is totally just off the cuff here, Scott. What's your thought on believers versus non-believers? People newer to the church that have a musical talent, maybe not a vocalist, but maybe what about a musician that is willing and interested? What are your
thoughts? That's a good question. I think it depends on a couple of things. Certainly, if we're talking about paid, I'm not going to pay a non-believer to come and play music at my church. But if we're talking about someone who attends the church, who isn't a Christian yet, but they're plugged in and they're wanting to grow more and they're wanting to learn more about Jesus. I mean, to me, it feels like what greater opportunity to be able to share the gospel with someone than to invite them to sing songs about Jesus every week or play songs. So for me personally, this is just a Scott Ball thing. I always kind of drew the line at, I'm not going to put a microphone in the hands of someone that I can't trust what they're going to say.
Yeah.
So I would allow some instrumentalists. I would be okay if we weren't sure on their salvation status.
Yeah.
But anybody who's singing or leading that way, I always wanted to be sure where they were at on things. Some churches would draw the line and go, hey, if you're up there, you're leading worship.
Yeah.
And so your heart and attitude and disposition towards the Lord matters. So that's a call you'll have to make for yourself.
Yeah, right.
For me, I was just going to say, for me, it was an opportunity to witness, particularly to like a high school kid or something like that. That was more usually the situation.
Yeah. Hey, you know what? But that brings up a good point. We didn't talk about this before the show started, but you might have a potential recruitment pool in student ministry, young people coming up that have a talent. So that might be a place to look as well, especially for that guitar, bass, drums, piano, even strings, and lots of stuff.
The best electric guitar player I ever had was a high school student who was pretty interested in guitar when he started playing with us, and to this day, and that only grew. It was a great excuse to his parents to get them to buy him that new pedal. I need it for Sunday, like I need that new amp. I try whatever. So that was the best electric guitar player I ever had, was a 10th grader when he started with us.
Yeah. So don't overlook that. When it comes to this, these types of talents, age sometimes is irrelevant. So
totally. Sometimes.
Yeah. Sometimes. All right. So that was our third point, is beginning to recruit the musicians for the team that you, as Scott said, have a vision for. I mean, imagine what you want worship to look like. How should it totally come across? What are the components of it? And what's the feel and the whole idea? So have that in mind. Our next point is that your worship leader or worship pastor, whatever title you call this position, their primary job is to develop good musicians and to build them into leaders in their own right, and not for that point person to just be a stellar solo performer and the focal of worship. So this would come into a well-written job description for this position in the church, and identifying what their core competencies should also be. So somebody, willing and able to build up others around them and not be the center point.
I think we talked maybe some about this in last week's episode. It's certainly something that we talk about a ton in Leadership Pipeline. And it's something that I feel very convicted about personally. You need to hire leaders, not musicians, not performers. Hire someone who is a leader. I will take a B- music. I mean, they got to be good enough. I would just kind of throw myself in that category as passable. No one's going to hear me lead worship and go, he's bad, but no one's going to go, wow, let's hire him at our church. Like, he's phenomenal. I probably rate myself a B-. I think people will go, okay, good. But what I brought to the table, or at least what I felt like was my job, was to make sure that everyone around me was better than me. And so they could take my B- and turn it into an A+ ministry. And I really believe that. I believe that we had that. I believe that we did regularly hear. We came because we heard the music is really good. And that wasn't a reflection of me. I had really good people around me. And so, and I was telling AJ this before we hit record. I look back on that ministry and that season of ministry. I've got, one of my band members is now married to a pastor, another one who is now a campus pastor at a church, another person who is moved on from worship ministry and is now sort of a pillar, just a key driver for the student ministry. And so, I look back, the things I'm most proud of about that ministry are the quality of leaders that came out of that ministry. And to me, that is the work. It doesn't matter what job you're talking about, youth ministry, worship ministry, senior pastor, the people, and developing them and discipling them and growing them as leaders. That's the job. That's the job. And at the end of the day, what's happening on Sunday has to be good. But if you focus on leadership development, what happens on Sunday will be good because you're doing it the right way. So I would just encourage you, if you hired someone because you thought they were a good musician, I mean, it's a benefit if they're a great musician, but hire great leaders.
Yeah. And that's a great segue still into our final point here. And that's, if you aren't spending enough time in practice, the quality is never going to improve. And the reason I think this is a good segue from where we just were is because I can't think of an example of a church that I've ever been at in which worship music was subpar and they were killing it everywhere else. First Impressions was great. Small group ministry was great. Preaching was great. Children's ministry was awesome. This is usually an indicator of all the other points of failure or lack of attention in the church. If you don't care enough about the quality of the music happening in the church, you probably don't care that much about the quality of almost anything else in the church either, except in maybe rare cases. So spending time in practice, so to get back on our specific point for today, spending time in practice, you've got to demand of your musicians that enough work is put in to have a quality product at the end of the day. Which is also one of your chief leadership development times that you'll spend with them as well. And I know the excuse here is, they're volunteering, they put in so much, or, gosh, this person works 60 hours a week. We just can't ask that much of them. But where else is that acceptable? Unfortunately, it becomes everywhere else. Like our Sunday school teachers, we don't want to have them, submit to us what their curriculum is going to be, or have a teachers meeting to make sure that they're solid on their doctrine. We let all this stuff go under the excuse of, they're putting in their time. We don't want to ask too much. They'll quit. if we ask too much of them, they'll quit. No, they probably won't. They'll be like, wow, we're actually building something great here. We're putting in the effort. We've got people backing us on that. We're striving for something better. So we got to get out of this.
Maybe don't ask people to serve in 5 areas so that they can.
That helps.
So that they can be fully invested in something. Yeah. I mean, sure, they can't make the practice because they're also leading a small group and they're serving in student ministry on Wednesday night. Mm-hmm. Of course they can't.
Yeah.
That is unrealistic. So maybe cut back on the number of things you're asking any one person to volunteer in and ask them to pick what they're passionate about. And if it's worship ministry and that's the primary area where they're serving, then it's not too much to ask them to come to a practice.
That's right. Yeah.
Let me briefly touch, if that's okay, AJ, on some tips on practice.
Okay. Yeah, sure. Yeah. Bonus points here on number 5.
And this is just off the top of my head, but I guess the first thing I'd say is I'm always shocked at the number of churches that I work with whose worship bands don't rehearse.
Yeah.
Or they do, but they do it on Sunday morning right before
Sunday
church.
morning. Yeah. A half hour before worship service.
That is not good. You're setting it up for it to be a failure from the get-go because you've added that stress. Like, we've got to get through practicing the songs before we have to be done. And then the tackiest thing in the world to me is walking in on Sunday morning 5 minutes before the worship service and the band is still up there practicing. I mean, you could not communicate how unprepared you are, like, more clearly to people. So you should be done like 20 or 30 minutes before service, so that whenever anytime a guest would reasonably show up, you're off of there. So some tips. I always will tell worship guys, they'll say, well, we don't need to do it just like the recording. Yeah, you should. Like, you should shoot for that. Shoot for what they're doing on the recording to the best of your ability with the instruments that you have. So you may not have every instrument they have, or you may not have all the equipment they have, but that's a little bit like there being a recipe, AJ, and you go, well, I'm going to do this instead. It's like, no, if you're missing an ingredient in that recipe, you may have to make do and bridge some gaps. But to have the ingredients and then choose not to follow the recipe is likely to result in disaster. And that's what a lot of churches do.
I don't even want the original artists doing it that. If I go to a Third Day concert, it better darn well sound just like the recording.
Sound like the recording. Yeah.
Don't be experimenting on my time.
Right. Yeah. So I would say, shoot for that. And again, within reason, like, if you're doing a Hillsong song, their version out on the recording is 9 minutes. You're not going to give it 9 minutes. So I'm talking more about the instrumentation or the feel of it. Like, what's their lead piece? Like, follow that. How is the drummer playing this beat? Try to shoot.
Don't change the phrasing. If people know the song and they're going to be singing along with it without looking at the words, they shouldn't be like, what just happened? I know. Yeah, right.
What's the vocal phrasing of this song and the arc of it? Like, let's follow that. So that'd be one thing. 2, I would say in practice, I would never move on from a song until I felt comfortable that if we played it just the way we played it on Sunday, it'd be good. So I'm not going to move on from this song until I feel comfortable. And if there's a song that they're just not catching it, replace it. Go. I don't think we're ready for this one. Let's shelve it. Mm-hmm. And what would be a good alternative? We'll do this one instead.
Yeah.
And never move on in practice until you go, that was good enough to play it on Sunday just that way. And then the third thing I'd say is on Sunday, Sunday should mainly be a sound check, but you should get there early enough to run through everything one time. Just that way you're sure everyone's on board. So I'm not saying don't practice on Sunday morning. I'm just saying Sunday morning shouldn't be the first time you practiced it. You're recapping. So you're making sure the sound's right and you run through everything. So we used to have our first service was at 9. We were there to set up at at 7. That was mainly because we were a
temporary space.
Yeah. So we had to set up. But when we moved to our permanent facility, I think we still did sound check. We had everyone there by 8. Service was at 9. So we were done from 8 to 8:30 was sound check. We stopped at 8:30, even if we didn't get through everything, because we didn't want a guest to ever walk in on us practicing, because it looks really bad. Like, it just looks really, really bad. And I don't say this to embarrass anyone or shame anyone, but if that's happening every Sunday at your church, that has to stop. I mean, maybe 0.5 can be 0.1. Start there. If you're like, where can I start? Have a practice earlier in the week. That would improve things probably a little bit, So yeah. I hope these have been practical things, AJ, for people to go, we could do that. We're not doing that.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, so, to kind of run back through these, first of all, get some honest feedback, be honest with yourself. If you know it's bad and you're just kind of ignoring it, you need to stop that. Number 2, be willing to say no to musicians and vocalists who really aren't good, leading to the necessity then for point 3, and that's recruiting musicians either internally or outside that could bridge the gap for you for a season until, your church, you're able to cultivate more people from within, or the church grows and you just add to your talent pool. Number 4, your worship leader's primary responsibility should be to develop that team, not for his or herself to be the center point. And then number 5 is practice. So make sure that the people that you do have are getting the most out of the time that they're putting in. And because this is an area in which doing it more and getting good feedback about it and having somebody that knows more than you do can help you improve in whatever your area of talent is. And then all those bonus points that you can read in today's show notes that you'll find over at malfirstgroup.com/149. And also for reference, we talked about 3 keys to a transformational worship service. This is more in worship service planning back in January of this year. And you can catch that on episode 124 if you're listening on the podcast, or at malfirstgroup.com/124 on our website. So I hope this was informative for people. I hope it was practical. We're glad that you're with us today. And want to make sure, though, that you know that all of these practical things we try to bring to you, we do from the heart of a nonprofit ministry, because that's what we are at the Malfirst Group. And we're depending on you and churches like yours to support us, to partner with us in ministry. Everything that we do, because this is going out around the world. And there are podcast listeners and website visitors from all around the world that we're helping at absolutely no cost, including trips for training and lots of things that we do outside of the US. So your partnership in that with us will really increase the quality and quantity of ministry that we can do at the Malfirst Group. And you can learn more about that at malfirstgroup.com/donate. Thanks for being with us. We love that you were, and we'll see you again next week.